The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Ravenscroft Palace as King Alexander III sat in his private study, the weight of the crown seeming heavier than ever before. At 68, his once strong frame had begun to show the years of service to the Kingdom of Valdoria, but his eyes remained sharp and calculating. The ornate mahogany desk before him was scattered with documents that would soon change everything his family had worked to build. Prince William Edward, the heir apparent, stood near the fireplace with his shoulders rigid and his jaw clenched. At 45, William had always been the picture of royal duty and dedication, but tonight something had shifted in his usually composed demeanor. His dark hair, streaked with premature gray from years of public service, caught the flickering light as he turned to face his father. "The allegations are serious, father," William said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to fill the room. "Lady Isabella's financial dealings have created a scandal that threatens to destabilize everything we've worked for. The press has gotten hold of documents that suggest she's been using her royal connections for personal financial gain." King Alexander rose slowly from his leather chair, his ceremonial robes rustling softly. The room, filled with centuries of royal portraits, seemed to watch their conversation with silent judgment. "Isabella knew the expectations when she married into this family," he said, his voice measured but firm. "The Duchess of Millbrook took vows not just to you, William, but to this institution and to our people. Lady Isabella Rosemount had entered their lives 5 years ago like a breath of fresh air. Beautiful, intelligent, and charismatic, she had captured not only Prince William's heart but also the hearts of the Valdorian people. Her background as a successful businesswoman and philanthropist had made her seem like the perfect modern addition to their ancient monarchy. The public had embraced her warmth and apparent dedication to charitable causes, seeing her as a bridge between the traditional royal family and contemporary society. But, now, documents obtained by investigative journalists suggested that Isabella had been leveraging her royal status to secure lucrative business deals for companies in which she held secret financial interests. The allegations painted a picture of a carefully orchestrated scheme that had been running almost since the day she had received her royal title. William moved away from the fireplace, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor as he paced. "She's built an empire in the shadows, father. Shell companies, offshore accounts, strategic investments, all hidden behind the veil of her charitable foundation. The Rosemount Foundation, which we all believed was purely philanthropic, appears to have been a front for much more complex financial arrangements." The king's weathered hands trembled slightly as he picked up one of the documents from his desk. The letterhead bore the seal of the Royal Financial Commission, and the contents detailed a web of transactions that seemed to implicate Isabella in activities that could be considered both unethical and potentially illegal. The foundation received millions in donations from foreign dignitaries and wealthy businessmen, the king read aloud, his voice growing darker with each word. Money that was supposed to go toward education and healthcare initiatives in developing nations. Instead, significant portions were diverted through a series of consulting firms and investment vehicles, ultimately benefiting companies with direct ties to Lady Isabella's personal portfolio. William stopped pacing and faced his father directly. She used her access to state dinners, diplomatic meetings, and official royal tours to cultivate relationships with individuals who had significant business interests in our trade policies. Every smile, every handshake, every charitable appearance, it was all part of a larger strategy to expand her personal wealth. The implications were staggering. For 5 years, Isabella had traveled the world as the Duchess of Millbrook, representing the crown at official functions and building what everyone assumed were diplomatic and humanitarian relationships. Instead, she had been constructing a sophisticated network of financial partnerships that had generated enormous personal wealth while potentially compromising the kingdom's diplomatic integrity. King Alexander set the document down and walked to the window, gazing out at the palace gardens where Isabella had hosted countless charity events. The people trusted her, William. They saw her as one of them who had risen to serve something greater. If these allegations prove true, it's not just her reputation at stake, it's the credibility of the entire monarchy. The room fell silent except for the continued drumming of rain against the windows. William joined his father at the window, and, for a moment, both men stood in contemplative silence, understanding that they were facing a crisis that could reshape their kingdom's future. "There's more," William said quietly, pulling a sealed envelope from his jacket pocket. "This arrived through diplomatic channels an hour ago. It's from the Valdorian National Bank, confirming that several international transactions flagged by our Financial Intelligence Unit can be traced directly to accounts associated with Isabella's business network." King Alexander took the envelope with steady hands, though William could see the storm brewing behind his father's calm exterior. As the monarch opened the seal and began reading, his face grew progressively more grave. £37 million, he whispered, the number hanging in the air like a death sentence. Transferred through 17 different accounts across 8 countries over the past 4 years. All of it connected to trade agreements and diplomatic initiatives that Isabella had direct knowledge of through her royal duties. The evidence was becoming undeniable. Lady Isabella had not simply made poor financial choices or gotten involved with questionable business partners, she had systematically exploited her position as a member of the royal family to build a personal fortune through what could only be described as corruption on an international scale. William felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. As the heir to the throne, every decision he made now would not only affect his own future but would determine the legacy he would inherit and, eventually pass on to his own children. The woman he had loved and trusted had potentially damaged the very institution he had devoted his life to serving. "We have to act quickly," William said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that would one day command a nation. "The press has pieces of this story, but they don't have the full picture yet. We have perhaps 48 hours before this becomes a public scandal that we can no longer control." King Alexander nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. "Call Lord Chancellor Pemberton and Attorney General Morrison. We need a complete legal analysis of our options, and we need it tonight. If Isabella has committed crimes, she must face justice regardless of her title or her position in our family." As William reached for the encrypted phone that would summon the kingdom's highest legal authorities, both men understood that they were about to embark on a process that would forever change their family and their monarchy. The woman who had once been seen as the future of their royal house had instead become the greatest threat to its survival. The rain continued to fall outside Ravenscroft Palace, washing away the last remnants of what had once seemed like a fairy tale marriage between a prince and a commoner. In its place, a complex web of deception and betrayal was being revealed, one that would test the strength of ancient institutions and the bonds of family loyalty. The crown's shadow had grown darker, and morning would bring challenges that would require all of King Alexander and Prince William's wisdom, courage, and determination to overcome. The grandfather clock in the corner of the royal conference room chimed midnight as Lord Chancellor Pemberton and Attorney General Morrison arrived at Ravenscroft Palace under the cover of darkness. The emergency meeting had been arranged with the utmost secrecy, and the two men entered through a private entrance that avoided the scrutiny of both palace staff and any potential media surveillance. Lord Chancellor Pemberton, a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, had served 3 monarchs throughout his career. His experience with constitutional crises and royal protocols made him invaluable during moments like these. Attorney General Morrison, younger but equally formidable, carried with him a briefcase containing preliminary legal analyses that would shape the royal family's response to the unfolding scandal. King Alexander and Prince William were already seated at the polished conference table when the 2 legal experts entered. The room, typically used for state meetings with foreign dignitaries, felt different tonight, charged with tension and the weight of impending decisions that could reshape the monarchy's future. "Gentlemen," King Alexander began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of leadership, "what we discuss here tonight must remain absolutely confidential until we determine our course of action. The evidence we've uncovered regarding Lady Isabella's financial activities presents us with challenges that extend far beyond family matters." Lord Chancellor Pemberton opened his leather portfolio and spread several documents across the table. Your Majesty, I've conducted a preliminary review of the constitutional and legal implications. The situation is unprecedented in modern royal history, but we do have legal precedents and mechanisms available to us. Attorney General Morrison leaned forward, his expression serious. The Financial Crimes Investigation Unit has been tracking suspicious transactions for 6 months. What they've discovered goes beyond what was initially reported. Lady Isabella didn't just use her royal connections for personal gain, she actively participated in what appears to be an international money laundering operation. Prince William felt his stomach tighten. Each new revelation seemed to deepen the betrayal and expand the potential damage to his family and their kingdom. How extensive is the network? He asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. 17 countries, 43 shell companies, and an estimated £67 million in questionable transactions, Morrison replied, consulting his notes. The operation was sophisticated enough that it took our best financial investigators nearly a year to trace the connections. Lady Isabella wasn't working alone, she had professional guidance from individuals with extensive experience in international financial crimes. King Alexander's hands clenched into fists as he absorbed this information. The woman who had sat at their family dinners, who had represented their crown at international events, who had been trusted with state secrets and diplomatic relationships, had been running a criminal enterprise from within the very heart of their monarchy. Lord Chancellor Pemberton cleared his throat. Your Majesty, we must address the immediate legal and constitutional questions. First, does Lady Isabella retain her royal title and privileges while under investigation? Second, what are our obligations regarding cooperation with international law enforcement? Third, how do we protect the integrity of the crown while ensuring that justice is served? The questions hung in the air like storm clouds. William understood that each decision they made tonight would have consequences that extended far beyond their family's personal pain and embarrassment. Regarding her title, Pemberton continued, we have constitutional provisions for suspension of royal privileges during criminal investigations. However, such an action would immediately become public knowledge and would likely trigger a media frenzy that could compromise ongoing investigations. Attorney General Morrison nodded in agreement. Our recommendation is to begin with a private confrontation. Lady Isabella should be presented with the evidence and given an opportunity to cooperate fully with investigators. Her response will determine our next steps. King Alexander stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. In the distance, he could see the lights of the city where millions of citizens trusted their royal family to uphold the highest standards of integrity and service. The thought of disappointing that trust weighed heavily on his conscience. There's another consideration, William said, his voice heavy with reluctance. Isabella has been privy to confidential state information for 5 years. Trade negotiations, diplomatic strategies, security briefings, she's had access to information that could compromise national interests if it's been shared with her business associates. This revelation sent a chill through the room. The possibility that state secrets had been compromised elevated the situation from a financial scandal to a potential national security crisis. Morrison made rapid notes. We'll need to conduct a comprehensive security review immediately. Every briefing she attended, every document she had access to, every meeting she participated in, all of it must be analyzed to determine what information might have been compromised. And we'll need to notify our international allies, King Alexander added grimly. If diplomatic secrets have been leaked, our partners have a right to know. This could affect trade agreements, security partnerships, and diplomatic relationships that have taken decades to build. Lord Chancellor Pemberton gathered the documents before him. Your Majesty, I recommend we proceed with a 3-phase approach. Phase 1 involves the private confrontation with Lady Isabella, during which we present the evidence and demand full cooperation. Phase 2 includes the security review and coordination with law enforcement agencies. Phase 3 covers public disclosure and management of the constitutional crisis. Prince William felt the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders as he considered the path ahead. When do we confront her? He asked, knowing that every hour of delay potentially allowed more damage to be done. "Tomorrow morning," Morrison replied. "We've arranged for investigators to be present during the conversation, and we'll have recording equipment to document her responses. This isn't just about family anymore, it's about evidence collection for potential criminal proceedings." The room fell silent as the four men contemplated the magnitude of what they were planning. In less than 8 hours, they would confront a member of the royal family with evidence of criminal behavior that could result in imprisonment and permanent exile from the kingdom. King Alexander returned to his seat, his expression resolute despite the obvious pain in his eyes. "We serve the crown and our people before we serve our personal feelings. If Isabella has betrayed that trust, she must face the consequences regardless of the personal cost to our family." "There's one more consideration," Pemberton said hesitantly. "Lady Isabella is currently scheduled to attend the International Children's Fund Gala tomorrow evening. It's a high-profile event with significant media coverage and international dignitaries in attendance. We need to decide whether to allow her to fulfill this obligation or to cancel her appearance." William felt a bitter irony in the situation. The same charitable events that had made Isabella beloved by the public had apparently been used as cover for her criminal activities. Allowing her to continue representing the crown while under investigation felt like a continuation of the deception, but canceling her appearance without explanation would immediately trigger speculation and questions. "Cancel it," King Alexander decided. "We'll cite a minor illness. Better to manage speculation than to allow her to continue exploiting her royal platform while we know what we know." Attorney General Morrison closed his briefcase. "We should also prepare for the possibility that Lady Isabella might attempt to flee the country once she realizes the scope of our investigation. I recommend coordinating with border security and international law enforcement to ensure she remains available for questioning." The meeting was drawing to a close, but each man understood that the real work was just beginning. They were about to embark on a process that would test every aspect of their legal system, constitutional framework, and personal integrity. As the legal advisors prepared to leave, King Alexander spoke one final time. "Gentlemen, tomorrow we begin a process that will either strengthen our monarchy by demonstrating our commitment to justice, or damage it irreparably if we handle it poorly. The eyes of our nation and the world will be upon us. We must proceed with wisdom, courage, and an unwavering commitment to truth." The clock chimed 1 o'clock as the four men shook hands, each understanding that they had just planned a confrontation that would change their kingdom forever. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the storm brewing within the walls of Ravenscroft Palace was just beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravenscroft Palace as Lady Isabella Rosemount made her way to what she believed would be a routine briefing about upcoming charitable engagements. Dressed elegantly in a navy blue suit that perfectly complemented her auburn hair, she carried herself with the poise and confidence that had made her a beloved public figure throughout the kingdom of Valdoria. Isabella had no idea that her world was about to crumble around her. Prince William stood at the window of the formal dining room, watching his wife's approach through the palace corridors via the security monitors. His heart ached with a mixture of love, betrayal, and dread. The woman walking toward what she thought was a simple meeting was the same person who had shared his bed for 5 years, who had laughed with his children, who had stood beside him at countless official functions as his partner and closest confidant. King Alexander sat at the head of the long dining table, flanked by Lord Chancellor Pemberton and Attorney General Morrison. Several thick files lay before them, containing bank records, transaction histories, recorded phone conversations, and photographic evidence that painted an undeniable picture of systematic financial fraud and corruption. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen, one of the kingdom's most experienced financial crimes investigators, had positioned recording equipment discreetly throughout the room. Every word of the coming conversation would be documented as potential evidence in what could become one of the most significant criminal cases in royal history. The ornate double doors opened, and Isabella entered with a warm smile that faltered immediately upon seeing the solemn faces arranged around the table. Her intuitive intelligence, one of the qualities that had first attracted William to her, quickly assessed that this was not the meeting she had expected. "William," she said, her voice carrying a note of confusion as she noticed her husband's rigid posture and avoided eye contact. "Father Alexander. I thought we were discussing the children's hospital fundraiser schedule." King Alexander gestured to an empty chair across from the assembled group. "Please sit down, Isabella. We have matters of extreme importance to discuss." As she took her seat, Isabella's eyes darted between the faces around the table, her mind clearly racing to understand the situation. The presence of the Lord Chancellor and Attorney General, combined with the formal atmosphere, suggested that whatever was about to happen involved legal implications far beyond routine royal business. "Isabella," Prince William began, his voice strained with emotion, "we've discovered information about your financial activities that requires immediate explanation and clarification." Attorney General Morrison opened the first file and began laying documents on the table between them. Bank statements, transfer records, and incorporation documents for dozens of shell companies created a paper trail that stretched across continents and currencies. "Lady Isabella," Morrison said formally, "our investigation has uncovered evidence suggesting that you have used your royal position to engage in systematic financial fraud, money laundering, and corruption over the past 5 years. These are serious criminal allegations that carry potential penalties of significant imprisonment and permanent exile from the kingdom." Isabella's face went pale, but her composure remained intact. She examined the documents spread before her with the same analytical attention she had once applied to her legitimate business ventures. Her silence stretched for nearly a minute before she finally spoke. "I assume you have questions for me," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious gravity of the situation. "I'm prepared to answer them truthfully and completely." Lord Chancellor Pemberton leaned forward. "We need you to explain the nature of your relationship with Meridian Holdings, Baltic Financial Services, and the 17 other companies listed in these documents. Our records show that you've received over £67 million through these entities while serving as Duchess of Millbrook." Isabella took a deep breath, and, for a moment, William saw a flicker of the vulnerability that had made him fall in love with her years earlier. But, when she began speaking, her words revealed a depth of calculation and deception that shocked everyone in the room. The Rosemount Foundation was indeed the front for a broader financial network, she admitted, her voice gaining strength as she continued. "But, it wasn't born from greed or personal ambition. It was created as a survival mechanism in a world that I quickly realized was far more complex and dangerous than I had anticipated when I married into this family." King Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Explain what you mean by survival mechanism." Isabella stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the same gardens where she had hosted countless charitable events. "When I became Duchess of Millbrook, I was introduced to a world of international diplomacy and business relationships that operates according to rules very different from those taught in business schools or ethics courses. Within months of our marriage, I was approached by individuals who made it clear that my position provided access to information and opportunities that could either be exploited voluntarily or extracted through less pleasant means." The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Isabella was suggesting that her criminal activities had begun not as a choice but as a response to coercion or threats. Detective Inspector Chen spoke for the first time. "Are you claiming that you were being blackmailed or threatened into committing these financial crimes?" Isabella turned back to face the group, her expression now showing a mixture of defiance and resignation. "I'm claiming that the intersection of royal access and international business creates situations that don't fit neatly into legal categories of right and wrong. When foreign ministers and business leaders offer donations to your charitable foundation while simultaneously discussing trade agreements that your husband will influence, when declining those relationships might affect your kingdom's economic interests, when accepting them provides funding for genuinely helpful charitable work, the moral calculations become more complex." Prince William felt his anger rising. "You're suggesting that you committed crimes to protect the kingdom? That you stole millions of pounds and laundered money through international criminal networks as some kind of patriotic service?" "I'm suggesting," Isabella replied, her voice growing firmer, that I adapted to a system that already existed. Every royal family in Europe faces the same pressures and opportunities. The difference is that most of them have been managing these relationships for generations, while I was an outsider trying to navigate waters I didn't understand. Attorney General Morrison consulted his notes. Our investigation shows that you actively sought out these relationships, that you traveled to meet with known money launderers and corrupt business leaders, that you structured financial arrangements to hide the sources and destinations of funds. This goes far beyond passive acceptance of a difficult situation. Isabella returned to her chair, her demeanor shifting from defensive to resigned. You're right. What began as accommodation became participation, and what began as participation became leadership. I discovered that I was very good at creating financial structures that served multiple purposes simultaneously. The charitable work was real. We built schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects that have helped thousands of people. But, we also created mechanisms that allowed international business relationships to operate more smoothly and profitably. King Alexander leaned back in his chair, struggling to process the complexity of what he was hearing. Isabella, you're describing a system of royal corruption that undermines everything our monarchy stands for. If what you're saying is true, then, you've not only committed crimes but, you've also compromised the integrity of our diplomatic relationships and our commitment to serving our people. With respect, Father Alexander, Isabella replied, using the informal address that had once signified her acceptance into the family, I've exposed a system that was already operating. The only difference is that I was more efficient and more successful at it than most. The money I generated didn't go toward personal luxury, it funded genuine charitable work while also providing financial security for relationships that benefited the kingdom's interests. Detective Inspector Chen made rapid notes as Isabella spoke, recognizing that these admissions were providing valuable evidence but also revealing a level of systematic corruption that extended far beyond a single individual's actions. Prince William stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. You've betrayed everything we stood for, everything we worked to build together. You've used our marriage, our children's heritage, our people's trust as tools in a criminal enterprise that you're now trying to justify as some kind of noble sacrifice. Isabella looked directly at her husband, and, for the first time since the meeting began, her composed facade cracked slightly. I've protected this family and this kingdom from financial and political pressures that would have destroyed us if handled through official channels. Every dollar that passed through those accounts served purposes that official royal finances could never have accomplished. I created solutions to problems that you never even knew existed. The room erupted in tense silence as each person absorbed the full implications of Isabella's defense. She wasn't simply admitting to financial crimes, she was claiming that those crimes had been necessary to protect the very institution she was accused of betraying. Lord Chancellor Pemberton cleared his throat. Lady Isabella, regardless of your motivations or justifications, the actions you've described constitute serious violations of both domestic and international law. We need you to provide complete documentation of all financial relationships, all business partnerships, and all individuals involved in these networks. Isabella nodded slowly. I'll cooperate fully with your investigation. But, I want it understood that when the complete story emerges, you'll discover that the choice wasn't between legal and illegal activity, it was between managed corruption and unmanaged destruction. As the morning sun climbed higher outside the palace windows, it became clear that the confrontation had revealed not just individual criminal behavior but a systemic challenge that would require fundamental changes in how the monarchy operated in an increasingly complex global environment. 3 months after the confrontation that shattered the royal family's foundation, the kingdom of Valdoria found itself transformed in ways that no one could have anticipated. The investigation into Lady Isabella's financial network had expanded into the largest international corruption probe in the kingdom's modern history, revealing connections that stretched from small European principalities to major Asian financial centers. King Alexander stood in his private study, now cleared of the documents that had once covered every surface, reviewing the final report that would determine both his daughter-in-law's fate and the future of his monarchy. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier, nor its responsibilities more complex. Prince William entered quietly, his appearance noticeably changed by the stress of recent months. The confident heir apparent had been replaced by a man who carried the visible burden of having to rebuild not just his personal life but also the public's trust in his fitness to someday rule. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent grappling with the intersection of personal betrayal and public duty. "The final report from Attorney General Morrison," William said, placing a leather-bound folder on his father's desk. "Isabella's cooperation has been extraordinary. She's provided documentation for every transaction, identified every participant in the network, and helped investigators trace financial flows that span 15 years of international corruption." King Alexander opened the folder, scanning pages that read like a thriller novel rather than a legal document. "And the security assessment? No classified state secrets were compromised," William replied, relief evident in his voice. "Isabella kept her personal business network completely separate from her access to diplomatic information. Whatever her other failures, she didn't betray national security interests." This news provided some measure of comfort in an otherwise devastating situation. The investigation had confirmed Isabella's claims that her criminal activities had emerged from a complex web of international pressures and opportunities that existed at the intersection of royal privilege and global business interests. Detective Inspector Chen's final report had revealed that Isabella's network, while criminal in its methods, had actually generated substantial benefits for the kingdom's economic interests. Trade relationships facilitated through her connections had brought billions of pounds in legitimate business to Valdorian companies, while her charitable foundation had funded development projects that had genuinely improved lives in dozens of countries. "The moral complexity remains troubling," King Alexander said, settling into his chair. "Isabella committed serious crimes, but the investigation suggests that refusing to participate in these networks might have harmed our kingdom's interests even more significantly." This was the dilemma that had kept both men awake for months. The traditional royal approach of maintaining absolute moral authority seemed increasingly incompatible with the realities of modern international relations, where personal relationships, financial incentives, and political considerations intersected in ways that defied simple ethical categories. William walked to the window, looking out at the palace grounds where Isabella had once hosted events that were simultaneously charitable fundraisers and sophisticated business networking opportunities. "She's agreed to accept a plea agreement that includes 15 years of exile, forfeiture of all assets connected to the criminal network, and lifetime prohibition from holding any royal title or position." The plea agreement represented a compromise that satisfied neither justice nor mercy entirely. Isabella would avoid imprisonment but would lose everything that had defined her life for the past 5 years. She would be stripped of her royal title, separated permanently from her children during their formative years, and exiled to a life of anonymity that would be the opposite of everything she had worked to build. "And the broader reforms?" King Alexander asked, referring to the comprehensive changes in royal financial oversight that had emerged from the investigation. "Approved by Parliament yesterday," William replied. "Every member of the royal family will now have complete financial transparency, with quarterly audits and immediate disclosure of any business relationships or investment opportunities. We're essentially accepting that royal privacy is incompatible with public trust in the modern era." These reforms represented a fundamental shift in how the monarchy would operate. Future royal family members would have their financial lives scrutinized to a degree that previous generations would have considered unthinkable, but the alternative was a continued erosion of public confidence that could ultimately threaten the institution's survival. King Alexander closed the folder and walked to a portrait of his grandfather, King Frederick II, who had ruled during a simpler era when royal authority was less questioned and international relationships were less complex. Frederick never had to navigate the kind of moral ambiguity that we've discovered. His world had clearer distinctions between right and wrong, legal and illegal, royal and common. "Perhaps," William said, "but it also had less opportunity to actually help people." Isabella's criminal network funded the construction of 47 schools, 12 hospitals, and water systems that serve over 2 million people. "If we had followed traditional royal protocols," none of that work would have happened. This was the painful irony that both men struggled to accept. Isabella's criminal activities had generated genuine humanitarian benefits that legitimate royal charitable work could never have achieved. The moral calculus was further complicated by the knowledge that other royal families across Europe were likely operating similar networks with less oversight and transparency. A knock at the door interrupted their contemplation. Lord Chancellor Pemberton entered, carrying news that would provide the final piece of the puzzle they had been trying to solve for months. "Your Majesty," Pemberton said, his expression grave, "we've received communication from 12 other European royal houses requesting confidential consultations about implementing similar financial reforms. It appears that our situation is far from unique." William and his father exchanged glances, understanding that their family's crisis had apparently exposed a widespread pattern of activities that other royal families were now scrambling to address proactively. "They're afraid," King Alexander said, not really asking a question. Terrified, Pemberton confirmed. "Our investigation has created a template for the kind of financial scrutiny that could destroy any royal family operating in the gray areas that seem to be common throughout European aristocracy. They want to implement reforms before they face their own scandals." This development provided an unexpected silver lining to their painful experience. The reforms forced upon them by Isabella's crimes could become a model for modernizing European monarchy more broadly, potentially strengthening the institution by making it more transparent and accountable. William felt a complex mixture of emotions as he considered the path forward. So Isabella's betrayal might ultimately serve the cause she claimed to represent, protecting and strengthening the monarchy for future generations. "Perhaps," his father replied, "though the personal cost has been enormous." The personal cost was indeed significant. Isabella's children would grow up knowing that their mother had been exiled for criminal activities, though they would also know that those same activities had funded genuinely helpful charitable work. William would eventually remarry, but the experience had fundamentally changed his understanding of the intersection between public duty and personal relationships. As the three men discussed the implementation timeline for the new financial oversight protocols, each understood that they were participating in a historic transformation of royal governance. The changes forced by crisis would become the foundation for a more sustainable and ethically defensible form of monarchy. 6 months later, as King Alexander watched his son deliver a public address announcing the completion of the royal financial reforms, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. Isabella's crimes had created the most serious constitutional crisis of his reign, but they had also forced innovations that strengthened the monarchy's long-term prospects. The Kingdom of Valdoria had emerged from the scandal with reduced royal privacy but increased public trust, with constraints on royal financial activities but greater clarity about royal purposes and values. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that even ancient institutions could adapt and reform themselves when faced with evidence that traditional approaches no longer served contemporary needs. Lady Isabella Rosemount, now living quietly in a small Swiss town under her birth name, had become an unlikely catalyst for changes that would benefit royal families and their subjects for generations to come. Her personal story was one of ambition, corruption, and exile, but her legacy would be the modernization and strengthening of institutions that had seemed increasingly anachronistic before her scandal forced their evolution. The crown's shadow had revealed uncomfortable truths, but in confronting those truths honestly and completely, the monarchy had found a path toward greater relevance and legitimacy in an era that demanded both transparency and effectiveness from its leaders. In the end, the most profound betrayal had become the foundation for the most significant renewal, proving that even the darkest scandals could illuminate pathways toward better governance and stronger institutions when handled with wisdom, courage, and an unwavering commitment to serving something greater than personal interests.